Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Chasing Squirrels podcast. On this episode, I'm going to be talking with Jill Stambolich, and talking with Jill reinforced the fact that more conversations need to occur between secondary school instructors and elementary school instructors. Jill is a dynamic and diverse educator. I really do think she's got her sort of finger on the pulse of what is kind of up and coming within education, and some of her work that she's involved with something called Integrative Thinking is just fascinating to me. And when I think about the projects and the diversity of projects that I know my elementary school partners are involved in, I'm only further blown away by the sort of the commitment to learning new things and learning new edgy tools and strategies in order to help children at the elementary level. I fully appreciate the time that it takes to develop these tools, and I fully appreciate the time that Jill took out of her schedule to talk with me. It was a fantastic conversation, and I gotta tell you, I learned a ton. Enjoy the episode. All right, super stoked to speak with Jillian Stambolich. And Jillian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Could you, just before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, because I think I mentioned to you before we hit the record button, my sketch note is full of bits and pieces that I'd like to play with, but could you please just let us know what's your portfolio right now? What are you working on in education?
I'm working on a lot, testing out a lot, learning a lot. In the York Region District School Board, I teach a grade 3 and 4 class with a bunch of really awesome kids who are on this journey with me, with some awesome parents who are shifting their thinking with me as well. A really interesting, eager staff who are shifting all over the place, and meeting a lot of new friends through some courses I'm teaching at York University as well. So I have a big catchment area of people that are influencing my thinking right now.
I want, if I can, like I said, I try to make some connection points on the sketch note, and obviously I want to honor what's of interest for you as well. But where I like to start sometimes is the whole becoming the teacher. And if you rewind it back to the beginning, did education or becoming a teacher, did you find it or did it find you? What's your origin story?
That's interesting. So when I was graduating in 4th year and I was coming out with a music degree and a phys ed degree, and I said, okay, now what? I guess, well, maybe I should look at education. And I applied to a very specific program, which I did not get in. And I only applied to one university and one program. Maybe I was trying to do that to myself because I thought for sure I was going to go into business world, into banking. Mm-hmm. And I've always been fascinated by business and money and people. And then I was at my job working at Canada Trust at the side counter, and a young girl came in and she needed a money order because she was applying to this brand new program down in the States, and it could start in January, and she was really excited, and you could get your teaching certificate and off you go. And I went home that night and I went talking to my mom and dad at dinner. I said, that's what I want to do. So in a way, I kind of tried to push it away, but it came back and found me.
That's awesome. I remember Canada Trust. Does Canada Trust?
Now it's TD Canada.
I thought so. I can remember in my university town, they always seemed to be offering very similar products. And I didn't really connect the dots, but I thought kind of similar in name. So you apply and you transition from, were you a teller? What were you doing at Canada Trust?
Yeah, I was the teller, and those are the days when you had your own cash drawer, so you were going through thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a day, but it was a kind of job where you could kind of expect the same thing every day. And as I mentioned before, I studied music in phys ed, or it was kinesiology phys ed program, and those are not the same thing every day kind of things. And I'm not the same day everyday kind of person, but I was trying so hard to put myself in this box, in this role of what I thought, because I kept saying I enjoyed money, but I'm not after the money. It was the creativity of it actually I enjoy. I like problem solving,
Hmm.
and I found money, problem solving interesting. But it's really, I think it was the people that yeah, I was raised. My mom and dad owned a store, and I was up there. At 6, 7 years old, standing on a chair working the cash register while they were busy with things in the back. So from a very early age, I've been fascinated by people, and then by, I don't know, the problem solving, I guess. So that part of which became interesting in my teaching career. That's probably a whole other podcast, but
Oh,
it's
we'll definitely get to those pieces. You talking about the bank reminds me, both of my parents, my father for a lot longer was involved with the Bank of Nova Scotia. And I was always, my mom did a stint with the bank as well as a teller. And I was always mind blown. And I often reflect about, when I think about how jobs change. And I think about when I would go to, my mom got me a job sweeping the parking lot at her bank, and it was so awesome because the bank manager would sort of put $10 direct deposit, but it's not like direct deposit like we know it now. He would just be walking over to my mom, handing her a $10 bill. She would go into the system and put it in. So he's handing 10 directly, not like direct deposit digitally that we have now. But
yeah,
I can remember going to, meet my mom at the end of the day, and there'd be 10 tellers on
yeah,
and a lineup. And depending on the day, of course, if you're there on, Thursday or Friday on payday, or if you're there sort of like between 3 and 5 p.m., that's their crush time. And, you go into a bank now, and it's just so fundamentally different. Three tellers on, you know, you're sliding your card to do all the information. It's very rare you see someone holding an actual passbook anymore. And I often think about the now and then kind of mantra, and even within education. So I've only been involved in education for 12 years, but some of the things that have very drastically changed in education, because I think, like I said, if my mom had stayed in banking, she probably wouldn't have been able to remain a teller, like just by the numbers. It doesn't stay like that.
yeah.
So what do you see in, that's my long segue into that idea of change within education, and how there's some pretty big paradigm shifts happening, and we can't always hang on to the old. So if I use that teller thing, like 10 years ago there was 8 tellers on it, now we've got 3 or maybe 2. How does that connect to your view of education right now?
It's interesting. For me, the paradigm shift has been about the almost the hierarchy in the classroom,
Hmm.
how we see the role of the teacher, the role of the students, what school is supposed to look like, what's supposed to happen every day. You can easily take a day off because you leave your supply teacher plans that are X, Y, and Z, and here is the question you ask, no matter what the answer was before, because this is my plan. And so interestingly, that has always been a struggle for me. It was always tricky for me to understand why we had to hand in our entire year plans before we even met the kids.
Oh, wow.
That I never was good at that. I always had to go to somebody and say, help me figure this out. I don't get that. How do we know we're going to be teaching in December, when what if something changes? What if something happens? So in that way, I feel this rejuvenation in my own practice, but in teaching in general, where we can actually start to question and rethink what's really best for kids, what's really best for learning. But that also then puts a lot of emphasis on looking at yourself as a teacher, as an educator, and saying, okay, what are you actually going to do differently because you say this, but now what are you going to do? And to be able to do that, what do you need to do or learn or be differently? What's your mindset? What's the skill set that you need to change?
I love the segue that you're giving me here. I'm gonna time travel a little bit with you. I'm gonna go to the past, and I'm gonna bring it right up to the current, because I feel as if we're just on the edge of talking about your current project with integrative thinking. Mm-hmm. But I want to go back a little bit before that, and I want you had a blog post back in the day that talked about finding courage, and I think this is sort of so important for educators, especially when we start, I think, to talk about creating risk opportunities, positive risk opportunities for our students. And there's a whole lot of there's a whole lot of assumption that if we sort of edu-wash the heck out of it, we can create language that suggests that risk is, sort of like the structured risk for students is a good thing. Like they're going to benefit from it. They're going to get resiliency and learning skills and develop work habits to sort of be kind of supportive of changing environments and dynamic environments. But I still bring it back to what's the sort of driver within a teacher, though, to sort of demonstrate, because there isn't someone creating those structured moments for us as teachers.
Right.
We have to find ways, I think, my philosophy, we have to find ways to do it, to find them intuitively, and just kind of say, I'm going to go for it. And I'm going to dance in front of my students, or I'm going to sing in front of my students, or I'm going to try a new lesson plan, or bring in a new technology. So back in the day, one of your posts was talking about the courage to move beyond pleasing other people. And I found that a profound piece, because you laid out very clearly areas of your educational world where you felt like you were externalizing or looking to satisfy others and not yourself first. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like what that moment, not necessarily the blog post, but just that turning point for you of realizing, it strikes me that you sort of had that aha moment, I got to do this for myself.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like that, you're hitting bottom, and I don't mean, to be trite about, people who have really difficult times in their life. I wasn't going through something that was dramatically, traumatically difficult, but in a sense I was, in terms of my thinking about myself or the value of myself as an educator. Mm-hmm. I was really quite desperate for a change, but could not figure out how I could make that change happen. I did not realize that, in fact, I had the power and the ability to make that change within my own classroom. But I was, I went through school, went right from high school to university, basically to teacher's college to teaching. And I had never known at that time, 40 some years, anything different than the traditional boundaries and limitations of school. And so I was questioning why I felt that way without really having any benchmark, any understanding why. So it was kind of this traumatic shift. So I said, maybe I'll try admin. So I got my PQP courses, and I thought this is what it was going to be. And I had a couple of interviews, and I got all the way to that point, and they said, no, thank you. You still have some growth to do. And, it hurts a bit, but you say, okay, I'm going to try this. And then I had another interview, and it was the same kind of reaction. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is this karma I'm putting out? And one of my friends said to me, a really kind and very wise female friend said to me, it's a sign, Jill, there's something's telling you something, just be patient. And I wasn't being patient at all. And, over the last 3 or 4 years, I have become hugely more energetic, happier. I still struggle with pieces because I'm constantly learning. So I get into frustration levels. I get to, get stuck in places. But I think that for me, it was somewhat of courage to say, you know what, I am valuable enough and I'm smart enough, and I'm worth it to take the risk for myself to move forward. And I got it's a really great positive family too, who sometimes they say, I don't even know what you do. Like, what grade are you teaching again? I don't even know what you're teaching. I kept it very, very private. I realized that my work life was very private, and that was interesting to me. In the shift that I've done now, they know exactly what I'm doing. I just had an article published in the Ontario Music Educators Association, and I was showing my kids, and they're like, "Mom, you're in a magazine. That's so cool," And I thought I might not have done that before because there was such a strong separation between my personal value and my personal life and my work life, and I had to kind of say, smart up, take a risk and do things differently, do things because it's the right thing to do, and for the kids that you work with and the families that let you have their kids for 6-7 hours, and and also for yourself. Like, yeah, it was kind of a smarten up moment, I guess.
It's very cool. Congratulations on getting published. It's definitely it's definitely the type of energy. No, you have to. Honoring self is important, and I've had I've so many takeaways from doing this podcast, but one of the things that I find coming up is that you need to take pause. Sorry, you don't. I do when I listen to this, and I think to myself, there has to be some celebration to that. There's so much of what we do that is prescriptive, that feels like it is for somebody else. But when you say yes for yourself and you make it happen, there's celebration there, and there really should be. And so many of my colleagues so quickly will celebrate the other, whether it's the student or their colleague, and yet so, abashed at the possibility that somehow they should sort of just put their fists in the air and say, "Man, I did this thing." It's an important bit of energy. So kudos to that. That's really cool.
Well, it was with my mom's. She's a super big fan lately of mine, in which I find it's so interesting as we age and we have our relationships change with the parent child, and I now have I have 3 teenagers, so my relationship's constantly changing with them. But when I was going to present at the conference in Washington, and I was my mom was emailing me, how's it going, and I said, oh, I just it was at this wine and cheese, and I talked to John Hattie, and I was so excited, and I said, I can't believe this is happening. And she emailed me back like, well, why can't you believe it's happening, Jill? Like, you're awesome. Of course he would want to talk to you. Why wouldn't you? And she doesn't know who John Hattie is, and
she gets the dynamic, though. That's the thing. She totally gets the dynamic.
Yeah, so I think that having those kind of people in your life are important too. And then, like you say, giving yourself pause to say, yeah, this is pretty great, because you have to give off that vibe too, or Chris Cuff won't want to talk to you. That's
oh jeez. I almost feel like just for a second I got slightly put in the same galaxy as like Hattie and Fullen, and I'm just gonna I'm a
fan.
I totally want that t-shirt.
And maybe tattoos.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna start. Well, like I said, I'm sending you a Chasing Squirrels sticker. Maybe I can sort of next round, once I get through my stash, I'll put sort of lickable stickers for the people that have chatted with me, just as something a little bit more prominent. I'll get them to tweet it out. I was on Chasing Squirrels and I got a tattoo for it.
Yep.
So I'm circling towards integrative, but you gave me a stop first, and I think it was in I think a lot about the whole ZPD thing. So that idea of somehow setting up that context for a student, and kind of like watching the context to see if the student, what they'll do when you sort of put them in a situation, like where they're going to go, they're going to rise, are they going to fall? What are the little bits that you have to add to it just to kind of keep them on track? Yeah. And I think that we do a really great job in general as educators, especially now as we have deeper conversations about modern learning. But I think we do a pretty good job of setting the stage, so to speak. But if I back it up one step, I'm curious, who does that for you? So who's your go-to person that you feel like is kind of setting context for you
Yeah.
to step up and do the amazing work that you do?
Oh, that is such a hugely amazing question, Chris. It's funny because I was really thinking deeply about that. How, yeah, how important it is for us as educators, as learners, as teachers, as researchers, whatever kind of stance we would be in that time, to have that go-to person. So in a quiet way, there's an amazing guy named Mark Husband. He's doing his PhD at York in primary math, and I sat in on some of his classes on my 405 leave, and he his he totally changed and shifted the way I think about things, just watching how he was helping teacher candidates reimagine what teaching and learning of math looked like.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it in such subtle ways, through tasks and provocations that invited such a huge variety of solution sets and of thinking and of answers. But the one thing that I've taken from him directly is this idea of feedback as questioning, constantly supporting student learning through offering a question rather than a telling. The notion of telling and what that means, and he would be one of those people who pushes my thinking. I'll say something, oh yeah, I'm gonna ask the group of people in the AQ course I'm working with. I'm gonna ask them what they think learning is, and he'll say, well, what do you think learning is? Well, what is learning? And I'm like, wow, okay. He has that incredible ability to do that. And I think it's another person who does it is, I don't know. Sometimes it's just those really amazing aha moments of a couple books that I've been reading. Visible Thinking, that's a good one. It's a tough one, but it's a really good one. But it's more the conversations that recently our staff jumped on it. So I read it last year, but on second read, I'm getting so much more out of it. And because we're doing it as a small primary, our division in our school, I'm getting tons out of the conversation of that. And so
so John Hattie, going back to John Hattie again.
Well, he's visible learning.
Yep.
Is making thinking visible.
Oh, okay.
And making thinking visible is Ron Richard, and he's from Harvard, and it's Project Zero. It's the visible thinking, the thinking routines. It's really cool thinking. Yeah, I have a friend, another friend at York who I can just kind of touch base with and bounce things off of, and she does similar to Mark. She will not answer me. She will question or redirect me in a really kind way. And that is really empowering as a learner, I guess, in that stance. But I'm looking to try to build that, within my realm of school, and I find there are pieces that I can lean on different pieces on different people for.
That's awesome. I was in a convo with a very well connected mentor of mine, and I was talking about this mini conference that I was at, and sort of just kind of throwing down similar energy that you're throwing down right now, because I can when you listen back to this podcast, and I hope you do, you will definitely hear the difference between what is basically the lead up to that question and how heightened your energy was. Like these, I'm getting the digital vibes here. Like these are really key players in your current thinking. And mm-hmm. I do believe that you can't have that type of energy or positivity about key players unless you also believe they're going to take you somewhere next. So it's mm-hmm. not just right now that you're jazzed up about it. It's like, I got so much from these that I don't know what to action first. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. Like you almost feel, like you're just zipping around like a hummingbird with the different possibilities. Mm-hmm. So I was in a similar energy space talking to a colleague, And he said, you know what, I wish I haven't had that moment in a while. I haven't had that where I felt like somebody kind of got inside my brain and my soul and answered questions that I didn't even know I was asking yet. Because that can be a pretty revelatory moment where you're just like, oh my gosh, like that's totally what I sort of say to myself when I don't tell anybody else my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the wow factor that you're throwing down, because it, the whole need for us to exist out with our staff, with our students, with our school, and outside of that, it's one of the things that I often say is to go on that search means that you do sometimes have to step outside um, of your region or your board. You have to almost
Yeah.
be prepared, and the resources are everywhere.
Tell me more about the idea of a mentor, because I was purposely searching for a mentor within like the district, our school district, but was finding that to be a challenge because it's almost like, you can't be one-sided. It needs to almost be certainly a relationship. I think you could set mentorship programs up, but
Hmm.
I don't know how successful that is when both people aren't invested in it in the same way or equally or mutually in a mutually beneficial way.
Hmm.
But like, how did you find your mentor?
For me, it came down to, so for let me I'll say something else. I think you're good with it, with these individuals that are part of your sort of your critical care package, the ones that you feel like you can, because I think that whoever it is that you include in your professional learning network, someone often put it like they have their Navy SEAL list, and then they have the broader list. So the Navy
Yes.
SEAL list are those ones that you can throw out a message, and
Yeah.
you're going to get an answer.
Yeah.
And then the broader one is more where you're just kind of you're following and gathering resources, but there isn't this sort of reciprocity and engagement that you get with that shorter list.
Hmm.
I would say that if the individuals that you spoke of before, they sound like they either directly exist in that space or provide enough content that you feel like you're supported. Because it can be, you could. I was talking with someone last night, and they got a book from Star Sackstein that they said was an amazing book about changing how you grade, and it was a good book to read. But then they sort of had a couple Twitter conversations with Star, and all of a sudden it became a key anchor to their relationship. Like it became the thing that was sort of like the driver to their common interest. So
Hmm.
it's, on one hand, I guess I'm just setting up. It sounds like you have some of that going on with the individuals that you mentioned previously. As far as me finding a mentor, it happened in interesting ways. I am at my heart an apprentice. When I was going through, I'm very much the person that, in my learning style, I'm highly auditory and slightly visual, but I'm very I kind of have a third. I'm a real sensitive guy. I'll just put it that way. So when someone is talking to me, I am soaking up the words that they say to me, but I'm also picking up the nuances of what they're saying. So the shape of what they're saying, and I track it well. I blame my mom, I guess. My dad
But
was a great. My mom was oversensitive. My dad was just a great conversationalist. So between the two of them, that's something that led me to the understanding that I need to apprentice with people. So that social relationship of learning is key to me. Now, in high school, I didn't know that. I've actually just come to embrace that more in my professional life. And I think that any of the courses that I didn't do well in, aka grade 10 math, I won't go back there, but that was really what it was, where I actually felt like I was stripped of the relationship. I felt the teacher was just being a insert bad word. But I think what it was the inability for me to establish rapport whatsoever. So
Mhm.
me doing apprenticeships, I like to align myself with people that I feel are both willing to work with me, but are also open in the way that they share and obvious in the way that they share, and are so out there on the fringe that at some point I don't expect to make it to the fringe, but their tide will sort of create some sort of like trajectory for me, and then I'll just go off on my own.
Yeah.
So back in September, I was listening to a podcast by a fella, his name's Roland Chidiak, and he was talking with another guy named Stephen Hurley. And Stephen Hurley is a former, I guess he's still an educator, but he was in a former life he was associated with Peel Region, and now he works for Canadian Educators Association, part of his portfolio. And in the podcast, near the tail end, they were talking a whole bunch of things, and one of the things they mentioned is how the CEA is getting some regional exchanges together. So at the tail end of the podcast, they say, yeah, just go to such and such website and put in a proposal, like who you are, what you're sort of bringing to the conversation. So I went to that. I put it in. I was like, okay, let's see how this flies. And I got accepted, and I went. And that was the turning point. I met individuals there that I had kind of followed online, and I had read about in, Teach Magazine and CEA documentation, and I met them in real time. And pretty much how you said, when you're hanging with Hattie and Fullen,
Yeah.
and you're like, these dudes like Chardonnay. I like Chardonnay. Let's go sit down. It was very much like that. And I now have what I would say is a very strong collection of digital individuals that I also have real-time connections. I've met them and sort of sat down with them as well. And they've furthered my thinking I can't say more than what I could have accessed in our region, but I will say it's more than what I had before. I've always been in small programs where I felt like I was the one entirely responsible for driving my curiosity, and just kind of like waiting for somebody to notice, hey, what are you doing over there? Why do you draw and then teach and then kind of like sit down and meditate? Like all these kind of things that are the nuanced parts, or actually not nuanced, completely obvious. Like if you were to watch me, I am a squirrel in the class. So if teaching, you're like, why do you do that? I'm like, because I feel like better when I teach like that, and the kids ask questions. Like it's almost curious to watch me teach. So as far as my mentorship goes, these individuals, and we've kind of parlayed that into a voice ed, which I can connect you with afterwards, is Stephen Hurley's project of internet radio.
Yeah.
And it's all about education. I've done some broadcasts there, and we have a hashtag on ed mentors, which is specific to target pre-service teachers, but we're starting to get broader conversations of people that just want to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
But like you, I don't know if I've found, here's the thing, I don't know if I've really, really looked, but right now I don't have a mentor. I'll put Will Gurley in a mentor. Definitely. He's one. I have a great connection with the guy. But I don't have a real-time actual that I would meet on a regular basis.
Well, it's interesting that one of the things I picked up on was your comment that it wasn't necessarily that you couldn't get it from within, your context or within the board or the good learning that is here.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it had to be connected in a different way. It had to be amplified because of that experiment. And that's the interesting piece for me. And I think that's one of the key learnings that we're taking away in general in education now, is that you cannot sit. Well, it's funny because I say it to the kids in my class all the time. You can't sit and wait for the learning to come to you. You have to go to the learning. Constantly, that is one of the things that we share in our grade 3-4 class.
Yeah.
You need to come to the learning now. You don't sit and wait for it. But that is one of the traditional models of teaching and learning in our schools, where it didn't matter if you were really, really excited about finding out about microwaves. That's not what we're doing right now.
Yeah, that's not the lesson today.
Yeah. So, but then if that's all we knew as students, then that's all we know as teachers.
Mm-hmm. But like we were mentioning before, I think that's shifting, and I think individuals that, I think it's okay to have that. I'm a old system and new system. I'm not a old system, just like burn it to the ground, salt the earth, and let's just jump into new systems. I believe everything about education is, as I've seen so far, is it's an evolution, it's an iteration, but it's based on, there's a whole lot of sound approaches that diversify. So yeah, I think that individuals can hold on to old ways, but I also think at some point they need to let go of old ways just long enough to exist in that ambiguity of what will happen next, just to really see if there's true value or true stability in the next step, or if they need to move back to old ways.
Yeah, and that brings us back to exactly what you mentioned at the beginning. That's risky.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's risky, but it's that I always like the question, but what if we don't?
Yeah.
It's not a what if we do, but what if we don't? I think that's going to have the greater impact of what if we don't try this? What if we don't shift? What if we don't, just do something? Just try something out new and
Mm-hmm.
see what happens. Open your eyes to see what's going out, in your neighbor's classroom and your friend's school. What if we don't let go of this whole idea that knowledge is proprietary?
Yeah.
And I think we see that in within our teaching system too. Like somebody does something really, really great. If you share, well, now it's not, I don't own it anymore. But isn't that the great thing that we all get to do it now? Like that idea of,
And what next?
yeah.
So
And
let's iterate. Let's
run left with it, and who's going to run right with it?
You got it.
Yeah, pretty cool.
So we have arrived. Well, I'll tell you. I actually wrote down here and put a couple circles around it because at some point you wrote the whole. I think you had mentioned before that whole "I wonder," the power of that statement. I wonder,
Mm-hmm.
and what not to be too cheesy about it. What I'm wondering about right now. Yeah, that was not bad. So this brings us up to the current project that you're involved with. So the integrative thinking.
Yes.
And I think we're in a really cool spot now talking about, kind of touching on necessity for change and go to the learning and how you've sort of demonstrated that sort of risk taking and, you've met some of the big ships in our ocean, these individuals that sound like they've really sparked big thoughts in your head. And now you land in this integrative thinking. I don't want to call it a project because it's actually it's closer to what would be a year-long additional qualification, I guess. So
Well, it's a practicum program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shape it out. What is this thing?
Oh, so cool. So last February, again on my year of yes, my 4/5 leave, where I just said, geez, if I've got the time and the money and the energy, I'm going to give it a go. So I found out about this. Heidi Suak is an educator who's now seconded to the ministry, but she was from the Hamilton board, and I had kind of stumbled onto some of her posts on Twitter and found her just very smart what she was saying. So I kind of jumped on her thinking and found out about this integrative thinking day. And so I said, well, I'm going to, go to the day and see how it is. And it was interesting because it was quite different, quite a big kind of dramatic shift thinking the first time I went. And I started kind of, I guess, thinking about this thinking because I didn't really quite understand what they were talking about yet. Like the whole idea of Roger Martin's book is called The Opposable Mind. And the idea that some of the great, it's coming from a business model, but the great business thinkers, it's not necessarily what they did, but and not even the process of how they did it, but how they allowed the opportunities to even be imagined, because they could take two completely opposable ideas and just hold that space in their mind open as long as possible until every single idea could be sussed out, could be played with, could be, could be imagined, could be touched. And that for me at that time was kind of out there, was kind of, I couldn't put my finger on it. And so they have 3 basic tools for thinking that they offered. And one of them is causal modeling. Just basically, you have a problem or an issue that you're needing to understand, and you need to say, well, what caused that? So it presents itself a little bit like a mind map, but mind map kind of goes to the thinks and the knows, where this really, I started to it was tricky for me to understand it, but I got it because I was thinking a lot about the regio um, in early learning, where it's I wonder,
Yeah.
and it's not going. I see. I think I wonder is usually the natural protocol. And I've learned from Ellen Brown. She's a doctoral student at York in early learning. She frames it as I wonder, or sorry, I notice, or I see, or I notice. I wonder, I think. Because if we can go into the wondering first, we may open up greater possibilities for what might come next. If we go to think too soon, we're actually coming up with a conclusion. And so I was also thinking a lot about critical thinking because I was involved in our central networks team from our school would go and get together with all the other schools in our area, and everybody kept coming up with the same problem of practice, which is our students need to be better at critical thinking, and if we develop more chances for them or more skill sets or whatever the language was for them to be critical thinking, then they will use this in their communication and in their application and things like that. But I kept saying, but what is critical thinking? Like, and how are we going to do that? And I got thinking, I don't even know if I even understand what we're talking about. So this all started to come together for me. And then Rotman offered the I Think program for a couple summer days. So I attended that. And then I was completely hooked because I started to really see that this was not a way to look for answers, but it was a way to look for more and more questions. And then it connected with my thinking about George Couros and innovation, where we have to, where if we can just keep thinking broader and broader and broader, certainly we are going to come eventually to a conclusion, or we need to come with a solution set. But can't we just the process of that? It's so engaging and so creative and so collaborative, and it was, I know, it just got bigger and bigger in my mind. So the three tools are causal modeling, the ladder of inference, and pro charts. And learning to use the tools has been quite a journey to really understand them. And I would not say I'm an expert in any means, but I'm giving them a go with, the 8, 9, and 10-year-olds in my class. And it's pretty amazing the thinking that comes when you teach this tool for thinking and then apply it when needed. I have 9-year-olds, in the classroom saying, "Oh, that's not data, though. You've jumped up the ladder of inference."
That's awesome.
It's pretty awesome. So it takes a lot of time. So this goes back to that another piece that I think about a lot, which is going slow to go fast.
Mm.
That's become very, very important for me. And being a grade 3-4 teacher, EQAO is looming on the horizon. And I'm okay with that. I'm at peace with it because I know that the kids in my class, we are taking so much time to work through thinking, rather in the content is driven through there rather than the other way around.
Right. That's awesome. The you make me think of a quote, and I wish I could remember the dude's name, but it talks about the tragedy of sending a changed individual back into an unchanged system.
Mm-hmm.
And on one end of that, I feel slightly comical, just to start this one off, because being involved in alternative programming for a large part of my career, sitting in a staff meeting when the sort of package slides are being delivered and we have the group share and the jigsaw, I felt I had a lot to say, but I felt like it wasn't in this conversation. The conversations that were happening to develop us professionally didn't connect well with where my mindset was. So that's sort of comedic. I mean, part of it is I found a way. Obviously, I'll talk about literacy numbers, and I'll talk about, how do we move kids from level 3 to 4. So the things that becomes a part of the common conversations at staff meetings. But I wonder, I'm getting the sense like this kind of lifted your brain out of your head and really kind of painted it with different colors and then put it back in and said, you go, dude. Let's see what you're going to do with this now. And
I think become the most important for me was that two pieces. One was, again, coming out of the early learning thinking, which is really how do we think about children as learners and as little people? Do we think that they are, there's that common empty vessels to be filled, with knowledge, and that's the purpose of schooling, and that's my job as a teacher. But also not only in terms of their cognitive development, but their social emotional development. Where does kindness and empathy and compassion really come in? And I'm not talking about behaviorally, but also through the learning. And that's what these tools do. Mm-hmm. It's very compassionate and empathetic to understand that all this time to do thinking and to allow everyone's opinions and solutions that are way out there, the way out there, the better, because we need to think about everything before we can, come up with a new piece. And I think I'm thinking right now about the pro chart. It's not pro con. Somebody doesn't always have to give up for us to go forward. Somebody doesn't have to give in or devalue their thinking, to find this new solution. In fact, we can look at all the best of both completely different opposable models and come up with something that just was never thought of before, that innovative piece. Sometimes it's iterative, but sometimes it's going to be really innovative, and not every time, but the process of going through that in that way is so kind, because it's telling again. I'm not telling you the answer. You are developing the answer. You are doing the learning.
I was gonna say, if I make a mistake in iterative, I feel so much better about it than when I make a mistake in zero-sum thinking. That idea that somehow by me gaining, you have to lose. That pie is one size. So
yeah, well, and that's the idea I think about with the this idea that we have to own knowledge. Like it's a race to who knows more, who has memorized more, who has gained more. That that's the winner in the end, rather than we all will win when we all think about it different ways and can support greater and greater thinking and new innovative ideas. And I think that that's what the workplace is demanding, that the students of today will be workers of tomorrow, in that kind of thinking, that kind of way. Mm-hmm. But what they say, right? Like it takes 5 years to shift the philosophy or shift the culture in the business world, and it takes 50 years in education.
Right.
So, along that way of shifting the culture, it needs to be kind and compassionate in terms of the learner. I think that.
There's something interesting to that, because I think that you see these you do see quicker, faster, drastic shifts when risk and mistake and failure and calamity are supported in the right way. And there's something really, I mean, to be a teacher in Ontario it can be a very nice insular job. You can keep moving forward in your job, and it's not as if that's not a bad thing per se, but it also means that the drivers that create the noticing that something could be different, and you are the one that could bring that difference. I don't know if there's faculty conversations about that. I think you and I talked before we started recording that a large part of what I look at as my professional learning network is that I include dissonant voices. So I include people that I know that I'm not offended necessarily by them, but they challenge my thinking and their thinking is different. And I also include individuals that have absolutely no connection to education, but I feel like I can steal their ideas. I feel like I can sort of take that and work it into my pedagogy.
Yeah, that's really interesting because then, well, that kind of breaks down that barrier too. Like we say, we want to build a community of learning, but yet, you can only come into my class when I say, and I'm only going to send home the notes that I say, and it becomes, very controlled. But if we can break down those barriers in terms of understanding how, you know, how much knowledge and how much wealth we have of understanding with the families that we have. Yeah, for our learning as a teacher. I have a family of one of my students, and the dad said, you know what, at my job, we have the largest 3D printer in, I think, North America because they manufacture car parts and they do it in a
Wow.
3D printer. He said, "Do you think the kids would like to come?" I'm like, "Yeah, I would like to
I was
come."
gonna say,
You
yeah,
know,
I need a new
and
bumper.
that's a very, very simple conversation at parents' night about. He mentions it. I said, "Oh, I've been reading about the 3D printers and how cool they are. I love these. Our kids to do something this year about them, and off we go. But I couldn't learn that within my school. I could not learn that from my administrators. Being lead learners, I could not learn that from a consultant in the board. You have to really break down some of these barriers in our practice of that way of our practice of learning, not only
Hmm.
our practice of teaching.
I like that you sort of you brought in a little bit of the parent teacher night there, and that kind of opportunity to broaden the learning community, to include parents in some of that planning, has always been an interesting kind of unicorn to me. I can remember starting, I think it was at some PD session where we were talking about the necessary stakeholders for lesson design. And, they kind of, a lot of people would start to put down the bulleted notes. And at the top of the list, I put parents. And someone looked over at my page and just kind of guffawed. And then they're like, hey, check out what Clough wrote. And I said, well, what if? What if the parents played a little bit more structured role in lesson design? Like, there's some really interesting conversation there. On one end, exactly the one that you were in, you have a parent that's willing to share resources.
Hmm.
Boom, like that's awesome. And you're going to figure out a way to make that work in your in your day, because it's just a connection that doesn't come every day. But then I also start to think about, I put uh, elementary school teachers, and they're like, I know the guy beside me is like, really, Clough, like that too? I'm like, sure. What if our lesson planning included conversations with our elementary partners so that we have a better understanding of that sort of that spectrum of skill sets that could exist? And this is sort of like in pursuit of the whole K-12 model. And
Yeah.
I'm not entirely, I'm falling more on the side right now currently as looking at as a pipeline, and not a supportive system, like an organic supportive system for growth. I'm going to find my way through that. But where I kind of land on that is this opportunity right now where, between you and I and maybe my hundreds of thousands of listeners, I don't know, probably not. I say that.
That's a lot
I
of
just,
Snickers.
yeah, I know. Eh? But what if from where you are, what could be some cool conversations that you wish were happening more often between elementary and secondary?
Well, I was lucky to have one to go back to that K-12 network, Central Network a couple of years ago. We got paired up, and I was sitting beside a high school grade 12 business teacher, and he was really excited to share a project he was doing where the kids, he brought in something to really spur the conversation, and then they had to choose which direction they were going to go to, and they thought about how they were going to make this project go, and the outcome was going to come, and they worked through, and he was supporting it. And I said, oh, so you brought in a provocation? And he said, a who, what? I said, a provocation. You bring in a thing, or a picture or a poem, and it just provokes the kids thinking. And when that one kid says that one thing that hooks you exactly where you need to go in the curriculum, you can help guide some thinking into there. It's what I do in kindergarten. So the grade 12 and the kindergarten teacher are having this fantastic uh, educators conversation about developing success criteria with our learners. with my 4-year-old learners and his 17-year-old learners. But it was the process of putting the student in the center of the thinking of that planning and engaging them in an authentic way, and then having them show their learning. I mean, it's not much different at the sand table as it was in the grade 12 business class.
I know, eh?
Yeah. So in that way, I think it's really important, because it's not about, it's a pipeline if we're stuck in curriculum.
Yes.
But it's not a pipeline if we're stuck in process. If we're thinking about process and we're thinking about thinking, the curriculum content will just find its way. We are professionals and we are very smart, and that's our job, is to have that curriculum piece present in the lesson. But if we think about it from, the driving of the process of the lesson design, the importance of choosing the assessments that are going to help show the learning and then help us decide what our next teacher move is for our next lesson, then I think we need to be having it in a K-12. We need to open up our doors. You can only have conversations with the same people so many times.
Yes.
We're all now starting to think the same, and that's one of my I think that really made a big difference after taking a year to kind of reflect on things. There's some great things about having people on staff, the same people on staff for a long time, because there's comfort, and then you can start to have conversations maybe differently. But at the same time, we all end up, I think we had this before we started recording, we're all now speaking exactly the same language, and nobody's thinking about engagement differently. Everybody's thinking engagement is sitting on the carpet with your legs crossed. Mm-hmm. Nobody's thinking about empowerment. Nobody's thinking about transformational change and thinking. Yes. I came to my husband's office to sit because it was a quiet place.
And he's having a busy evening.
Well, until the kids start calling, "Mom, where are you?"
Oh, that's right. Well, to that, we're coming up on the hour. It's flown by.
Oh,
it's flown by. Question. I have I think whether it was on Mike or before Mike, the whole chasing squirrels thing came from way back in the day, long before there was ever any inkling that I was going to become a teacher. I was living in Toronto, and I adopted my fiance, and I at the time we adopted a dog, and we came out of our apartment. She came out with the dog, and the dog was sort of in a harness, and we hadn't figured out the dog's story yet. Very pleasant dog. We still have the dog 16 years later. Darcy is her name. So Darcy kind of gets out on the springy cord lead ahead of my spouse and zips around the side of this large maple that's on the front of the house, out front of the lawn. And as my spouse gets around the corner, the dog has grabbed a squirrel off the tree. And yeah, I know, eh? But doesn't that just create incredible thoughts of opportunity in your head? Whoever catches a squirrel, it just doesn't happen. So the story, and of course, I mean, my dog is she's sort of nosing the thing, kind of bouncing her face off at the squirrel, screaming and freaking out. And my spouse sort of gives the few stop commands and screams, and she's having she's just kind of freaking out. So dog pauses, squirrel runs up the tree, and that's the end of the story. It's they kind of walk on well, whatever, I almost caught a squirrel. Thanks a lot for interrupting me. But the story, it stuck with me only in so much as because I still think about that. And how many times have you sort of, and maybe it's a never for you, but I've walked up to a squirrel and I'm hey, I'd like to get a closer look at you, little fella. And they corkscrew around the tree, and they're always just beyond your reach. And then all of a sudden they're 15 branches up above you. It's holy crap, how'd you get all the way up there? That's pretty phenomenal. And somehow my dog grabbed one. And it's stuck in my head as that suddenness sometimes, in that moment of change where you're just so stunned by the fact that you actually created change, or that it's in your hands and you still don't know what to do with it, whether planned or otherwise. So this idea of sort of accidental and intentional change, and that became kind of the back frame. I'm still working through it, but kind of the back frame to also why I called it the podcast for what it was, but also that whole how do we as educators, what are we leveraging within the system, and how do we see ourselves playing a part in that future system that maybe we won't actually see our own changes, like we're sort of slowly moving the beast forward. So here's the question for you. If I use the example of my my dog, the squirrel hunter, what squirrel do you feel like you're chasing right now? What's that thing that you know it, you want to get there, but it feels like it's just beyond your reach?
Wow. That would be just it's okay. I'm stuck on two things. I'm stuck on the idea of the powerful tools of integrative thinking and how we can, just empower student learning.
Mm-hmm.
So the learning is not an 8 to 2:30 or a 9 to 3:30 journey. That, I get Google messages. Hey, Miss Stambolich, I was just working on some Google slides. If you want to take a look at them, Saturday afternoons at 3:00. And I often will. I often will do that because I think that learning doesn't stop there. But I would love to see, eventually that we are not grading with numbers and letters anymore on 7-year-olds papers. I just would love to see that day where there is so much support and feedback and assessment that we can do it without having to label and put that unnecessary, I think, pressure on kids. I think we can have competition and great conversations without having to label them into being a B-.
That's cool. That's something that is right now on my horizon, sort of looking at how to leverage that. How do I go from belief and theory to practice?
And what we say and what we do. That's the big trick.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. I hope to sit across from you at the same table hashing this one out.
Listen, I'm going to be in your group.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Well, here we are. We're at the end of the hour. This has been awesome. Where do you want people to find you? Where would you, if people are throwing down questions or they want to connect with you or find out more about the Integrative Thinking project or any of the other stuff, the bits that you've thrown down, how to get a job at Canada Trust, all that kind of stuff. Where would you like to be found?
Good times. Twitter, at Jill Stam, Jill with one L. So it's at JILSTAM.
This was awesome.
Oh, my absolute joy. This has been a fantastic night. Thanks for including me in this group.
No, this is great. Thanks for talking with me. And we're going to connect soon. I can't wait to keep passing you in the digital hallways or at the next Pub PD session.
For sure.
All right. Take care, Jill.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Chasing Squirrels podcast can be found on iTunes and Podbean. If you want to reach out to me and have a conversation, I can be found on Twitter at Chris J. Clough. I also have a blog on Blogspot of the same name, Chris J. Clough. And some of my postings can be found on Medium, which I think I have under the exact same name. I really appreciate the time that you spent with the podcast this evening. If you ever want to be on the podcast, please reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to talk with you. And I am truly, truly grateful for you sharing your time with me. Take care.